Famous singer's daughter showed disrespect in court. Judge Caprio's sentence shocked fans. She didn't knock. The courthouse doors opened to her, wide and gleaming, as if the world itself had cleared a path. Flash bulbs exploded, camera shutters snapping like gunfire, and she stepped through with a slow, deliberate grace. Every designer stitch, every polished heel, every strand of hair seemed calculated to broadcast one message: I am untouchable. Whispers rose behind her, a mix of awe and irritation, but she didn't notice, or chose not to. Her smirk was effortless, her gaze drifting over the crowd like a monarch surveying subjects, expecting applause, not scrutiny. Inside, the echo of her footsteps carried through the marble halls, a rhythm of privilege that seemed to defy the seriousness of the day. Yet the courtroom doors loomed ahead, solid, imposing, and entirely impartial. Judge Caprio sat behind the bench, waiting, calm, unflinching. No flash, no fame, no spectacle could tilt him. For the first time, a flicker crossed her face, a subtle hesitation, almost invisible, but enough to suggest that the world she commanded outside these walls might not operate here. The air shifted. The crowd, tense and expectant, leaned forward. This was not a celebrity arrival. This was an arrival that dared to collide with the law itself. And in that collision, the first cracks in her armor appeared, subtle but undeniable. Would fame shield her, or would justice, patient and relentless, finally make its move? Every eye in the room held its breath, waiting for the answer. Do you understand the charges against you? Judge Caprio's voice cut through the murmurs of the packed courtroom, calm but unyielding. She tilted her head slightly, letting the question hang, as if the words were merely part of the scenery. Her eyes, framed by perfectly applied makeup, scanned the room, looking for recognition, for approval, for a hint that someone, anyone, would bow to her presence. Her lawyer murmured something in her ear, a quick reassurance meant to steady the tension, but even his words seemed faint against the judge's measured authority. She offered a polite smile, dismissive, the kind that suggested she had dealt with more serious matters than minor vandalism or a few disrespectful gestures. To her, this was a mere inconvenience, a speed bump on the highway of privilege she had always traveled. Judge Caprio continued, his tone precise, deliberate. Minor vandalism, contemptuous behavior in court, actions magnified because of the public attention her name drew. The words landed heavier than she expected. No applause followed her presence here, no sympathetic nods, no leniency disguised as charm. For the first time, the familiar walls of celebrity admiration did not bend around her. She shifted slightly, the smirk faltering, a flicker of unease betraying her practiced confidence. The courtroom held its breath. Privilege was meeting procedure, and the collision was sharper than she had anticipated. Every whisper, every glance, every carefully rehearsed gesture of superiority was absorbed and quietly dismissed. The law, patient and unflinching, demanded attention, not reverence. Her reputation, once a shield against scrutiny, now felt like a fragile veneer over raw vulnerability. And in that silence, the first real question arose. How would she navigate a world where fame no longer guaranteed immunity? Honestly, do we have to sit through all this? She whispered, a smirk tugging at her lips as she crossed one leg over the other. The whisper was loud enough that a nearby court clerk stiffened, and a few gallery members exchanged uneasy glances. She laughed softly, a sharp, dismissive sound that cut through the measured quiet of the courtroom. As the first witness took the stand, recounting her repeated disregard for rules, the rolling of eyes, the laughter during instructions, the mocking tone toward staff, her composure seemed almost rehearsed, as if insolence were an art form she had perfected over years of public attention. Every anecdote punctuated by witness testimony chipped away at the aura of glamour she relied on, revealing impatience, arrogance, and entitlement where charm was supposed to reign. Judge Caprio's gaze remained steady, unmoved by the theatrics. He interjected calmly when sarcasm surfaced in her replies, asking pointedly, "Do you find these proceedings a joke?" The room held its breath. Her smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty passing across her face, quickly masked by another roll of the eyes. The contrast was stark: defiance against authority, audacity against impartiality. The courtroom audience shifted, subtle murmurs rippling through the benches. For the first time, she sensed the weight of observation, not adoration, but judgment. Every whispered comment from the gallery, every uncomfortable glance, echoed the growing awareness that influence and fame could not rewrite decorum. She straightened in her seat, an almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw, as if realizing that the applause she once commanded had been replaced by scrutiny. Each revelation, each mocking retort captured on record, became a quiet fracture in her armor. The public's perception of effortless control and untouchable glamour began to erode, replaced by something more tangible: consequence. And in that fragile moment, as her eyes scanned the gallery and noticed disapproval creeping into familiar faces, the first real crack appeared in her confidence. A subtle, telling sign that no name, no legacy, no spotlight could guarantee immunity from accountability. The first image on the screen, security footage from the courthouse corridor, made her laugh freeze mid-breath. A stapler slides across the table, papers flutter in the air, and her voice echoes in sharp, cutting bursts. "You're all so slow," she had said, leaning back with a grin that once radiated, confidence now flickering. The gallery murmured, uneasy but captivated, as the footage played again, closer and clearer. Her smirk, the rolling of her eyes, the deliberate flick of a pen at a clerk. Eyewitnesses followed, recounting the insults and provocations with painstaking detail. "She called me incompetent," one clerk said, voice steady despite the sting of memory. Another described her mockery of procedural rules, her attempts to goad court staff into mistakes. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering reassurances, but Judge Caprio did not flinch. His questions were precise, surgical, exposing the efforts to sway minor witnesses and evade responsibility. "Did you intend to disrupt these proceedings?" he asked. Her silence was deafening, the room leaning in to catch the answer she could not give. Every micro-expression betrayed her: the lip that trembled just slightly, the jaw that tightened, the widening eyes as reality pressed closer. She had counted on charm, on influence, on the untouchable shield of celebrity. Now each flash of evidence punctured that armor. The courtroom became more than a room of procedure. It was a crucible, a place where arrogance was stripped bare and moral reckoning took shape. The murmurs grew, curiosity sharp and expectant. The gallery could see the collision unfolding: privilege meeting proof, entitlement meeting consequence. The tension was raw, almost physical, as she realized that the world outside, the world of flashing cameras and adoring fans, had no bearing here. Judge Caprio's questions continued, each one unearthing a layer she could no longer hide behind. The stakes rose. Fear crept into her posture, into her eyes, a subtle but undeniable acknowledgement that fame had limits. She shifted, trying to mask it, but the cracks were visible. This was no longer about smirks and dismissive gestures. This was about truth confronting spectacle, about accountability meeting pretense. And in that heavy, charged silence between testimony and footage, the courtroom and everyone watching felt it. The first real surrender of her facade. The moment where arrogance collided with undeniable evidence. And no celebrity name could shield her from facing what she had done. "Do you understand what it means to be accountable?" Judge Caprio's voice cut through the murmurs, calm but unyielding. "Not just here, not just for today, but in every corner of public life where privilege meets responsibility. Every choice you make reflects not only on you but on those who look to you, consciously or not, for guidance. For example, for influence." Her smile, so easy and practiced in the flash of cameras, flickered and faltered. She shifted in her seat, hands tightening around her designer clutch, shoulders tensing, breath quickening. For the first time, the theater of entitlement offered no protection. The judge did not speak of fame or fortune. He spoke of respect, civic duty, and the obligations that accompany every public act. The courtroom, usually a place of procedure and perfunctory gestures, transformed into a stage for moral reckoning. "You mocked the process. You ridiculed those tasked with maintaining order. You acted as if consequence could be bought or laughed off, he continued, each word deliberate, slicing through layers of defiance. Privilege is not a shield. It is a responsibility. And failing that responsibility leaves real damage in its wake. Damage to trust, to community, to the principles that sustain society. Her hands twitched, her head tilted defensively, as if physically trying to shrink beneath the gravity of his words. The micro-shifts were subtle, but impossible to miss. A tightening of the jaw, a restless movement of her fingers, a half-turn that sought escape. She began to grasp the broader weight of her actions, the ripple effects of disrespect, the dissonance between glamour and accountability. Families who had been quietly observing shifted slightly, their eyes weighing her, their silence louder than any rebuke. Her lawyer whispered, urging mitigation, yet every reassurance seemed hollow against the clarity of the judge's moral lens. Caprio's gaze swept the room, steady, inclusive, reminding everyone that this was more than a personal judgment. It was a lesson on ethics, on balance, on the unavoidable collision between unchecked privilege and the moral law that underpins society. For a moment she opened her mouth, then closed it again, caught between instinctive defiance and the undeniable confrontation of truth. The tension pressed in, thick and uncompromising. Every subtle gesture betrayed internal conflict, the flicker of fear, the tug of shame, the first hints of acknowledgement. And in that charged silence, the courtroom leaned forward collectively, anticipating the moment she could no longer evade responsibility. Would she rise, if only internally, to meet the ethical weight pressing down upon her? Or would she retreat further into the familiar armor of celebrity defiance, risking the full force of accountability? The question hung, electric and unavoidable, as the moral confrontation reached its peak. Your sentence is designed not to punish fame, but to teach accountability, Judge Caprio said, his voice steady and deliberate. You will complete community service in local civic programs, deliver a public apology, and participate in an educational initiative focused on courtroom etiquette and respect for the law. Let this serve as a bridge between privilege and responsibility. She blinked, startled, as though hearing an unfamiliar language. Shock rippled across her face, disbelief curving her lips into a faint, faltering frown. Flashbulbs ignited, capturing the exact moment celebrity confidence collided with consequence. For the first time, the world outside could see vulnerability where there had been only assured poise. Her legal team whispered, negotiating soft words, but the sentence was absolute, a measured equilibrium between moral correction and practical restitution. Her eyes drifted across the gallery, meeting the quiet, watchful gazes of ordinary citizens who had long witnessed the disparity between wealth and justice. There was no malice here, only the mirror of consequence, reflecting her actions with unforgiving clarity. On social media, opinions exploded. Fans debated fairness, hashtags erupted, and headlines splashed her name in bold letters. But the glare of public judgment was only part of the reckoning. Internally, her expressions betrayed the struggle. Slow nods, hesitant exhalations, trembling lips, micro moments of recognition that her name, her fame, could not exempt her from responsibility. She imagined walking through neighborhoods she had only glimpsed from limousines, volunteering in programs she had never considered, addressing groups who would hear her apology with measured skepticism. The sentence was a bridge from arrogance to accountability, forcing reflection in real time. Each step she would take outside the courtroom would carry the weight of visibility and consequence simultaneously. For the first time, she faced a dual judgment, the court of law and the court of conscience. The challenge was immediate and inescapable: how to reconcile privilege with principle, fame with humility, image with integrity. And in that moment, the audience felt the tension linger, suspended between disbelief and the first fragile stirrings of personal transformation. She had survived cameras, flashing lights, and whispers of fame, but she could not escape the quiet, unrelenting truth that responsibility had arrived, and it demanded acknowledgement. The first day she stepped into the community center, she felt the weight of every camera flash she had ever known, replaced now by a quiet, scrutinizing gaze far less forgiving than paparazzi. The eyes of ordinary citizens, children, and neighbors whose lives she had only glimpsed from the back seat of a luxury car. She arrived in her designer clothes, a faint smirk lingering, the habit of entitlement still clinging to her posture. But the room smelled of reality, of paint, dust, and the faint tang of morning coffee. It was impossible to hide behind a name here. "Okay, everyone, listen up. We have a visitor who has something to teach us today," said the coordinator, her voice steady, welcoming but firm. The children turned, curious, some whispering, some sizing her up like they would any adult entering their space. She faltered slightly at their unvarnished curiosity. No awe, no assumptions. Her first attempts were awkward. She smiled too broadly, words stumbled from her lips, gestures rehearsed. When she tried to explain respect and civic responsibility, a child raised a hand. "Why do you know about this?" The question landed like a challenge, piercing the bubble she had always lived in. She paused, swallowed, and finally said, I, I made mistakes. I'm learning that actions have consequences and that everyone deserves to be treated with fairness." Her voice was tentative but honest, the first trace of humility cutting through layers of performative confidence. Weeks passed, and the initial stiffness began to dissolve. She learned to sit at their level, to engage on the playground, to listen more than she spoke. Children's laughter replaced the echo of flashbulbs in her memory, small victories coming in the form of nods, smiles, and questions she could answer sincerely. Every act of teaching became a mirror, reflecting back her past arrogance and her growing awareness of its impact. Judge Caprio visited one afternoon. She felt her chest tighten as she greeted him, expecting judgment or admonishment. Instead, he observed quietly, eyes scanning her expressions, noting subtle changes, a willingness to listen, a careful attention to the children, micro smiles that carried genuine warmth. No applause, no announcement, just the quiet weight of acknowledgement that she was moving in the right direction. Conversations with community members offered another form of reflection. One elderly volunteer said, "It's not about fame, it's about learning to be accountable to people, to actions, to yourself. You're starting that journey." She nodded, absorbing the truth in ways words alone could never have conveyed in court. Every evening she reflected on her progress, tracing the arc from arrogance to accountability. Flashbacks of courtroom sneers and public scandal merged with the present moments of sincere engagement. Each day reinforced that responsibility was not a performance. It was a lived practice, a series of small, deliberate acts that restored trust and dignity, both to herself and those she had wronged. By the final week, she had grown into a version of herself unrecognizable to the girl who had once entered the courthouse with a smirk. She taught lessons with patience, answered questions without defensiveness, and listened when challenged. Trust, she realized, was not granted by fame, but earned through consistent, ethical action. And in that slow, steady transformation, the broader message resonated. Accountability could reach even those insulated by privilege. Humility could be cultivated through engagement, and justice extended beyond verdicts into the quiet, deliberate work of restitution. In facing the tangible impact of her actions, she had begun the hard but necessary journey from entitlement to empathy, from spectacle to sincerity, leaving viewers with a lasting echo of reflection. That character, not celebrity, defines responsibility. The microphone felt heavier than she expected. The room was packed, yet silent, not with awe but with anticipation, as though every person present had been waiting for this exact reckoning. She straightened her posture, inhaled, and let the memory of every misstep in court, every mocking smirk, every whispered insult to authority, wash over her. The luxury, the fame, the insulated life. It all seemed distant now, irrelevant in the face of the truth she had been forced to confront. "I want to start by acknowledging my past behavior," she said, voice steady but carrying the weight of sincerity. "I acted without thinking, without respect for the process, and without understanding how my actions affected others. I've learned that privilege does not exempt anyone from accountability and that respect, empathy, and responsibility are earned, not given. Her eyes met those of the children she had taught, and she saw recognition there. A tentative trust, slowly restored. Parents in the back nodded, some whispering encouragements, some just observing, measuring the change. She had spent weeks showing up not as a celebrity, but as a student of her own mistakes, a participant in the real work of accountability. The community she had once dismissed now reflected her progress back to her. Their trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick, through deeds rather than statements, through patience rather than entitlement. Outside, social media buzzed with tempered admiration, videos of her leading discussions, answering questions with thoughtfulness, and guiding children in civic responsibility circulated, a tangible record of transformation. Comments ranged from skepticism to genuine recognition of growth. Each post, each shared clip, reminded her that redemption was public, painstaking, and real. Children played under her supervision, laughter echoing across the room, a sound she once would have taken for granted, now a reminder of the life she could influence positively. She guided them with care, listening to their questions, validating their thoughts, and modeling patience she had once mocked. Every interaction became a lesson in humility, a small victory in the larger arc of responsibility. Her expressions, steady gaze, soft smile, subtle nods, spoke louder than words ever could. There was no smirk, no performance, only the quiet acknowledgement of consequence, the understanding that every action had ripple effects far beyond her own life. She had internalized the lesson that Judge Caprio had framed in court, that the law is more than rules. It is a mirror reflecting the moral choices that define character. The narrative that had begun with arrogance now ended with comprehension, accountability, and a cautious but genuine redemption. Privilege had met principle, and principle had prevailed, not through punishment alone, but through opportunity to act differently, to rebuild trust, and to transform awareness into conduct. And in that transformation, viewers understood the resonance of the journey. Justice is not merely the verdict, it is the lived reconciliation of action and consequence, the tangible work of repairing what was broken, and the quiet triumph of moral clarity over entitlement. Arrogance had given way to empathy, spectacle had yielded to sincerity, and the story closed not with applause but with the enduring echo of responsibility fulfilled.